So today I'll be talking about the sharks of Washington, their importance, and the threats that they face. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is their portrayal in the media versus the reality. And so in the media, sharks are often portrayed as human hunting killing machines that are really evil and horrible and out to get you, like in Jaws. The whole thing was that it's a killer shark that's out to get people. And so, and they're often referred to, things are like referred to as shark infested waters. There's no such thing as shark-infested waters. That's their home. We're the ones going into it. And so to say that the water is infested with sharks is completely inaccurate because they're not infesting anything. They live there. We're the ones going in and bothering them. And so in reality, sharks are rarely harmful to humans. They barely ever bite people. They'd rather swim away from you most of the time than approach you and bite you. And they're actually known to form attachments to divers and actively seek attention and affection from people. And so there have been multiple cases where people have actually that have dived have become friends with sharks, and the shark will come up to them, and it'll recognize them and pick them out of a group and go straight up to that person. And so globally, in 2024, there were 47 unprovoked bites with a total of 4 deaths. You are more likely to contract the bubonic plague than you are to get bitten by a shark and die, or even just get bitten by a shark. And the average yearly rate of reported infections of the bubonic plague is 200 to 700. And there were only 47 bites in 1 year. So there's like 4 times at minimum the amount of chance that you can get the plague versus the shark bite. And so that really shows how uncommon it is, because people think the plague is gone, and you're more likely to get that. And so sharks are also known to be very curious. And so most of the time when people are bit by sharks, it's not because it thinks you're a food source, because if it thought you were a food source, like if you've ever seen videos of great whites catching seals, you wouldn't be making it out of there alive, or even have a chance, because you would be getting rammed by the shark and flung out of the water, instead of it coming up and kind of nipping and then going away. Because the sharks, they're curious, and so they don't have hands. They can't pick things up and figure out what it is. They're like a puppy. They have to nip things and taste things to figure out what they are. And so by biting it, there's a lot of sensory information they can gain from that. They can see what it tastes like, what it feels like, how it reacts, things like that. And so often sharks will come and bite. If they bite a person, they bite them and then they let go, and often they'll actually spit out what they've bitten. And so they've also been seen doing this to garbage floating on the surface, clumps of kelp floating on the surface, seabirds, anything that they kind of can't figure out what it is, and so they want to investigate it. They'll go up and mouth it and bite it. They just have a lot stronger muscles and sharper teeth. And so an example of like to show how sharks, they're not out to get you guys, is like this. This is a zebra shark from an aquarium, and so this guy, he's literally an aquarist. That's cleaning the tank. The shark recognizes him because he does this all the time. Comes right up to him and just wants to be pet. Because it's not, if it didn't want to be pet, it wouldn't have come up to him. He's not harassing it. He's not harming it. It chose to come up to him. It can leave at any time. It just wants the attention and affection. And so they're not aggressive animals. They don't want to hurt you. They just kind of want to exist and not be bothered, unless they want to interact. And so like you can see the black-tip reef shark swimming overhead. They are not fazed by them. They don't want to bother them. They just want to go about their day. And so why sharks are important. So sharks, they stabilize the food web and they protect biodiversity. Because by doing this, they're able to stop a single species from gaining an advantage over everything else and wiping out biodiversity. Because biomass and biodiversity are 2 different things. It may retain, because people say, well, there's still a bunch of life there. It doesn't matter. But just because there's a bunch of living things doesn't mean that it's a healthy ecosystem. If it's all the same things, then there isn't the biodiversity that should be there. There's the biomass, but it's not the same, and it's far worse for the environment. So a good thing to think of it to compare is the forest, like the kelp forest in California with the sea urchins and the sea otters is very good for comparison because people pay attention to that. Because by taking out all the sea otters for the fur trade, the urchins lost their primary predator. And so the urchins were able to take over, and so there's a lot of urchins there now, but the kelp forest, which was the home of massive amounts of biodiversity, have been demolished by them. Or in Yellowstone, another good example, is the wolves and the deer in the forest. Because by hunting the wolves, the deer lost their primary predator, and so during the winters, their population was too high and it was damaging the forest. And by putting the wolves back in Yellowstone, they've actually seen the forest growing better than they have in the past 100 years, with like remarkable improvement simply by reintroducing the top predator. And so this causes them not to damage it because there isn't an overabundance of prey animals. And so it's a very delicate balance because that little graphic there shows the sharks are at the top, everything else underneath is a chain. And so it's called a trophic cascade. And so, some threats that sharks face are overfishing, illegal fishing, pollution, bycatch, loss of food source, low reproduction rates, and habitat destruction. So things like the loss of food source is because we're overfishing the oceans. By having these massive fisheries that people want, because people like seafood, and so a lot of that fish actually goes to waste. And it's causing problems for the sharks because if they don't have anything to eat, they begin to starve, and then they die off. And that also can increase the amount of shark attacks because they become desperate. Because if it's starving, it's more likely to try and target things that it never would otherwise. And so there's also bycatch from those fisheries where the sharks get tangled in the nets, like that thresher shark there in the middle right, or the middle left. And then illegal fishing for things like shark finning and shark fin soup and things like that. And so overfishing as well. In the places that it is legal to fish for sharks. They're overfished greatly and it causes problems for their populations. And so, unknown to many people, the U.S. is actually the 4th largest exporter of shark meat and shark goods around the world. So even though the U.S. is often seen saying, oh, this is a horrible thing, we need to stop it, we're one of the worst contributors to it. And so the NOAA did a survey in 2020 and found the U.S. exported over 7.05 million pounds of shark meat worth over $11 million in 1 year. And that was during 2020 with all the tariffs, and not the tariffs, without the shutdown. And then in 2022, the NOAA found less than 23% of the 66 shark stocks in the U.S. territory alone are at risk of, are safe from overfishing. And so, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the species of the Pacific Northwest, so the Puget Sound, Greater Salish Sea, and Outer Coast. And if you guys have any questions during this, please go ahead and raise your hand. And so, just to give an explanation of how I'm breaking it up, the Puget Sound, right here, this is a part of the Salish Sea, but I have it as a separate thing because since we live on the Puget Sound, it gives us a better idea of where these animals exist. So the Puget Sound is here, the Salish Sea is the Strait of Georgia, Strait of Juan and Puget Sound. And so when I refer to the Greater Salish Sea, I mean any of the water there. And then the outer coast is anything along the outer coast of Washington. And so the first species that I'm going to talk about is the Pacific common thresher shark. And so these sharks, their Latin name, actually, the vulcanus, is for fox, because they're very nimble, and so they're called fox sharks and a few other things. And so they primarily feed on schooling fish because they use their wood-like tail, the really long upper lobe with the caudal fin, to corral and then snap at fish. And so I actually have a video that I can show you guys past this. So these sharks, they tend to stay within 200 miles of the shore. They don't come into the Puget Sound or Strait of Juan or any of the Greater Salish Sea very often. Sometimes they're seen here, like there was one found up by Bellingham, and I think one found close to here, but it's very rare because they mainly stay along the outer coast, kind of close to the shoreline. Because they're not super deep water, but they're also listed as vulnerable by the red list, and they're highly migratory. So they travel up and down the Pacific coast. And so when they're hunting, this is the process of them hunting. So they'll take their pectoral fins and actually flatten them out, and that causes their body to pivot up over that point, rotating the tail around and then snapping it up over their head. So if you think of like a bullwhip, like have you ever heard one of those snap? It's that like really loud crack that causes that concussive force where the air can compress, water can't. So if you would have a whip snap like right next to you, it would hurt your ear because it's really loud and you feel like a bit of a concussion. But because the air can compress, it wouldn't really bother you that much. Like it wouldn't hurt you or possibly kill you. This, because water can't compress, their tails are actually able to create like basically an explosion underwater, and they snap hard enough that they can cleave the atoms in water molecules. So they can break the bonds between hydrogen and oxygen with the force of the snap of the tail. And so here's an example of thresher sharks hunting. And so their hunting method is called tail smacking. And so they whip it up over their head, and that stuns or kills the fish. Because it can actually, if the fish is close enough to it, blow the fish apart because of the force. And it's an effective hunting strategy when hunting schooling fish, because instead of biting one fish at a time, they can get 3, 4, 5 fish with one snap of the tail. And so there's a lot of mammals that use this, like whales, they use this strategy, but thresher sharks are the only shark species that uses this. And so the next species that I'm going to talk about is the basking shark. And so these used to be extremely common here in the Puget Sound, Greater Salish Sea, and off the coast. So they're believed to live for around 50 years, and they're one of only 3 filter-feeding sharks in existence in the world. The other 2, this is also the second largest shark to exist. The only one larger is the whale shark, and that also is a filter-feeding shark. And then one that's less known, that's the third filter-feeding shark, is the megamouth shark. But we don't have either of those here. This is the only one we have here. And so they're found all along the coast of Arctic and temperate waters, often staying close to the surface, and they were once a very common sight, like I had said. They're also the reason why one of the ideas behind sea serpents, because they would often be seen when they're swimming underwater, their nose will sometimes pop up over it, and the way that they swim, it looks like a snake's head swimming through the water. And so they'll also often swim in long, like single file lines. And so you see a bunch of them in a single file line all swimming like that, and it looks like a really big snake. And so that's one of the reasons why the sea serpent, one of the reasons they think sea serpent nests started to exist. And so, as I had said, it was past tense where they were common. They're no longer common here, and this is because of the basking shark eradication program. So this was actually done by Canada, and because basking sharks were determined to be a pest for fishermen, because they would get entangled in fishing lines. They were so abundant that they actually impeded the traffic of steamer ships. There were that many of them. They formed schools of hundreds or thousands if they all came together, and so we have that many of them. Schools of hundreds of them were a common sight. And so the current population is of the entire Northeast Pacific, so from the equator up in what is considered the East Pacific, so if you were to divide the Pacific in half lengthwise, from the middle over and the equator up, that's the Northeast Pacific. There's thought to be only 300 to 550 individuals left in that entire population. And so this has caused a lot of debate with scientists over, are we even going to be able to save them because of what has been done to them? Because there's so few of them left. So they, like I said, they used to be super common here. Now they maybe see 2 once a year or every couple of years. They'll see 2 of them, 2 or 3. They're rarely seen now. And so this officially occurred from 1955 to 1969, but it had started in 1949 because they were listed as a kill-on-sight animal. And there was a ship from the Canadian government that it was a fisheries patrol vessel that they attached a giant blade to the prow of. so that when the sharks were there, they could literally ram the sharks and cut them in half. And it managed to kill in a bay, let's see, what was it called? So I don't have the name of the bay listed, but it was in a single location. They killed 43 of them in one day with that boat, just one boat. And yeah, it was really bad because they killed so many of them. And because the goal was to completely eliminate them from the entire area. And they almost succeeded. So the next shark that I'm going to talk about, this is called the taupe shark. And so they live for about 60 years, sometimes less, sometimes more. And they're actually a recent addition to the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea, because they found them a few years ago, because they had come up from California and Oregon, and they didn't used to be in here. They hadn't documented them. But so this is a newer species. And so they're known by many names, including the soup fin shark, the school shark, and the vitamin shark. And so they're called the soup fin shark because in San Francisco Bay, they once were very common. There was a massive fishery that completely wiped them out. Their fins were prized for making shark fin soup. Their livers are also known as vitamin sharks because their livers were used to extract vitamin A because it's about a third of the size of their body, which is slightly larger than other sharks. And they can extract vitamin A from it. And so they were harvested for their liver oil. And then they're known as school sharks because they tend to travel in really big schools. And so a little interesting piece of trivia about them is that in the northern portion of the Eastern Pacific, so like from British Columbia to Northern California, most of the taupe sharks are male. In Central California, there's like 50-50 split between male and female. In Southern California, the majority are female. And so they don't really know why it's like this, but my personal opinion is that it's kind of like with reptiles, how temperature affects if it's male or female. I have a feeling that that might be it because the water up in the north is colder, the water in the center is slightly warmer, and then the water farther down is even warmer than that. And so with turtles and other reptiles, often if it's warmer out, if like the eggs hatch in a warmer condition, they're more likely to be female. If they hatch in a cooler condition, they're more likely to be male. So I'm guessing that might be why, but it hasn't been proven. And so another type of shark that I'll talk about here is the salmon shark. So we have these native to here. As you can see, they look very similar to great whites. So oftentimes when you see reports of like, oh, juvenile great white was spotted off the coast of Washington, or in the Puget Sound, or in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, it's not actually a great white. It's one of these. So they get to about 10 feet long. They're both great whites and this are both mackerel sharks. And so they're actually endothermic. And so mackerel sharks tend to look very similar. They don't always, because the thresher shark is also a mackerel shark. But the salmon shark and great white, they look close enough that people will stay them all the time. And so they're very opportunistic predators, and so they'll eat like anything that they can find. They primarily feed on salmon, as the name suggests, and other fish, but they'll eat basically whatever they can. And so another shark that we have here is the brown cat shark. So very little is known about these animals. Like we don't even know how long they're supposed to live for. That's why it says unknown there, because they live really deep in the water. And they're a small shark. People don't really care about small sharks. They're not fun to, most people don't think that they're fun to research. I think that they're cool. And it's very cute. So sharks live at depths from 33 to 1,298 meters, according to NOAA. It's a very specific number. They feed primarily on bottom-dwelling invertebrates, and they actually lay eggs that take up to 2 years to hatch. So they have very slow reproductive rates. This is the leopard shark, and so they're also somewhat recent here. I think the first sighting of them was in 2018. That's officially documented. I actually have seen them before that a couple of years because I was in Port Angeles backpacking. And so They get 4 to 7 feet in length, averaging at around 22 pounds, and they're found all along the outer coast of Greater Salish Sea and into the Puget Sound. They're opportunistic feeders, and they're often seen forming schools with other sharks and rays. So like they found them in large schools with dogfish and lobular rays and other things like that, and cat rays. And so it's interesting because most animals, they don't form schools with other animals that are different species, but these ones they do.
So on the leopard sharks, have they been observed up here forming the large schools at certain times of the year like they do like in San Diego?
So when I was researching them, there isn't as much known about them up here simply because they haven't been here that long and they've been here a while, but they haven't been documented for very long. And so there isn't a ton of knowledge about them. I'm sure that they form the large schools, they may be a little bit smaller than what they have in San Diego, just because it's a lot warmer there, and these are subtropical to that area. And so I'm sure that there's big schools that form, we just haven't found them yet. They're also a type of hound shark, and they feed on fish, benthic invertebrates, clams, crabs, squid, and other things like that. And they also really like shallow waters. They don't go into super deep water. So there's also the blue shark. So these sharks are highly migratory, and they travel along the outer coast and open ocean. And so they are extremely curious of divers and anybody else that they can find. So blue sharks often will come up to people and try and figure out what they are. And the more curious sharks are often the ones that get blamed for being aggressive, just because they're more likely to encounter people because they want to figure out what you are instead of swimming away. And so these are blamed for a lot of things. They're also they are the most heavily fished shark in the world, with over 20 million being caught per year. And this is problematic because in places that they're protected, yeah, they're protected there, but because they're a highly migratory species, they leave those places short and quickly. And so as soon as they leave, it goes from, oh, they're safe from being fished to everybody killed. And it causes all kinds of problems for conservation, because if you got it protected here, but not protected there, it's not working as well as it should. Because a good way to think of it is like the Migratory Bird Act. Nobody anywhere is allowed to kill migratory birds. They're protected, there's all kinds of things that are in place to stop them from being hunted, whereas with sharks, these are highly migratory animals, most of them. So they're traveling all the time. Even the spiny dogfish, they are highly migratory. They've found spiny dogfish that have been up by British Columbia in northeastern Japan. They went all the way across the Pacific to there. They travel up along the coast and in shallow waters. So it went up through to the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, across the Bering Sea, and then back down towards Japan. And so that's a small shark. They get like 4.5 feet long. So something like this that gets up to 13 feet long and travels the entire world, these are found in basically every single ocean. Not having them protected, even though they should be, causes massive amounts of destruction for populations. And so another shark that I'll talk about is the blunt-nosed six-gill. And so these live for about 80 years. They're known as a living fossil. And so because of their ancient lineage and the fact that they haven't changed, like the way they look hasn't really changed for, I think, 200 million years. They look pretty much exactly the same as fossils from the Triassic period. And so they also have 6 gill slits, which is another sign that they're a very ancient lineage, because they were from a time when the ocean had less oxygen, and so they needed the extra surface area afforded by another set of gills that would allow them to extract more oxygen from the water. And so they also lack a second dorsal fin. And that's another way to tell how old the lineage of a shark is, usually, is if they lack a second dorsal fin. Because if we look at the blue shark, you can see right here and there's two dorsal fins there. And it also has 5 gill slits, because most sharks that are like more of a modern shark, they have 5 gill slits and 2 dorsal fins. So these are opportunistic feeders, and they're found all over the globe, but they tend to stay extremely deep. The special thing about here at Redondo, which is labeled as the 6-gill capital of the world, is that they come up to really shallow depths, often around 49 feet, 49, 50 feet. Recently I heard a reporting that they came up to 16 or 14 feet at shallow. The shark that normally is thousands of feet deep underwater, coming up to 14 feet, is really cool because that makes them able to actually study. And part of the reason why they come so shallow here is because the Puget Sound is actually a nursery for 6-gills. And so that's why they're common and able to be seen at shallower depths. And so they're also the largest species in their genus, which is really cool, at least to me, because there's not many 6-gill sharks, and the fact that we have them at such a shallow depth and they're like the biggest one that there is interesting. So something that is very similar to them is the broad-nosed 7-gill shark. So these are actually a recent addition to the Puget Sound as well, because they were originally only found down by like California and off the coast of Oregon, and sometimes off the coast here. But a few years ago, around the same time as the taupe sharks, they were found down by like Olympia in the South Puget Sound. And so it was actually found by somebody that was fishing, and he was, I can't remember what he was fishing for, but it was a big enough fish that he had a reel that could haul in a 10-foot long shark. And he's there fishing, and they didn't know these were here. And so he catches this thing, and he's like, what is this? And so I believe he took it home with him. And the Fish and Wildlife came and basically raided his house because he posted a photo of it on Facebook or like Instagram or something. And he was like, look at what I caught today. And so they came and were like, we can't have this. We didn't even know this was here. Like, this is a new species in the Puget Sound that we found. Like, they knew that the 7-gills existed, they just didn't think they were here. And so these are also a very ancient lineage that's labeled as a living fossil, because as you can see, it only has 1 dorsal fin. They haven't really changed. They're also known as cattle sharks because of the speckling, and they have 7 gills. So just like the 6-gill, but from a time when there was less oxygen in the ocean. So they are very opportunistic predators, and whereas the 6-gill is a very deep water shark, these are shallow water sharks. And so they like to hunt in shallow inland waters, staying near rocky bottoms. Sometimes they're seen deeper in the water, but not as often. And they sometimes will be seen hunting in packs. And so it'll be multiple of them hunting together, which is cool. They're also curious, and they kind of want to figure out what they are, just like the 6-gill. Because like most sharks, they're pretty curious. They're smarter than people give them credit for. They want to figure out what things are. And so then there's the Pacific sleeper shark. So these are believed to live for 200 to 300 years, and they're native to the Pacific Ocean. The population that we have here, they're not quite sure if it is also in the South Pacific, because there's sleeper sharks down there that are very, very, very similar to the ones here. There's a few differences that they're still trying to figure out. Is it its own species, or is it the same species with just a slight variation? And so they're very common on the outer coast, not so much in the Puget Sound just because it's not deep enough. And they're often, when people see pictures of them, confused with Greenland sharks. So with the Greenland shark, because they're both a sleeper shark. The Greenland shark's a sleeper shark, this one's also a sleeper shark. But a good way to tell from the pictures, usually, is the Pacific sleeper sharks, they have a very uniform coloration, like that one. It's like black and gray. There's not like dark or very dark gray, because it may just be the lighting. Whereas the Greenland sharks, they've got more of that speckled and mottled color to them. And so sometimes you can do that as the base of like trying to figure it out, but other times, like in this picture here, they look it looks somewhat like a Greenland shark, but still not a Greenland shark because of the differences. But because it's got the scratches and it's kind of speckled, it can look like one a little bit. So these things, they feed on fish, harbor seals, octopuses, crustaceans, and they'll scavenge. And yes, I did say octopuses because it's the proper term with it, because it's a Greek-rooted word. And so, because I know some of you, at least one of you most likely thought, oh, you said it wrong, it's supposed to be octopi. So, octopuses is correct, because a Greek-rooted word, the I ending is for Latin. And so, octopuses is not Latin, it's Greek, because octo is 8 and pus is foot. And so, the more correct term is octopuses, and if you want to be like super accurate, it's technically octopodes, but that one just is a little more weird. And most people will understand what you're talking about when you say octopuses. Octopi, people can still use it, but to be like more accurate, it's octopuses. And so the spiny dogfish is one that's very common here. So they live for over 80 years, even though they only get to about 4.5 feet long. They're found all over, frequently in bays, and they're an opportunistic feeder. And so these are also the only shark species not protected in the Puget Sound. And the problem with that is that it actually takes them, the females, 35 years to mature before they can have pups. So one of these has to live 35 years to get to have pups, one time, for the first time. So by fishing for these, they're not reaching that age. And so the population is slowly going to decline, which is problematic because oftentimes it seems that governments and people wait until it's too late to fix things. Like with the basking sharks, had we not just demolished their population and then gone, oh, I guess that was a bad idea, now we're going to try and save them, when it's possibly too late to do that. If we just stopped letting people kill these sharks, we wouldn't have to worry about it, because we would go, their population is going to be stable because we're not hunting them. And so they're found at very shallow depths to around like 1,500 meter or 1,100 meters, but most of the time they're found more shallow. They can go deeper than that, but that's not very often. So the Pacific angel shark, this one is very uncommon here. It lives from southern Alaska to Baja California, so it is technically native to here, but they're rarely seen. Most of the time they're seen below the Washington-Oregon border because they tend to like the warmer waters, the slightly warmer waters, but they will live all the way up to Alaska, so they can tolerate the cold water. And so they look very similar to rays, like a stingray, but they're not because of this right here. So if you look here, you can see that there's that little line, the little divide, the slit there. And so that shows that their pectoral fin isn't fused with their head. And so rays, it has to be fused with their head, so it's one seamless transition. There's that little divide there, and so that shows that it's not in fact a ray, it is a shark, it just is kind of flat. And so these like to sit in soft bottoms near kelp forests and rocky reefs waiting for their prey because they're ambush predators. So they'll actually bury themselves in the sand and then open their mouth to create a vacuum. So if you guys have heard of like the frogfish, which is one that's kind of fun to talk about in like documentaries, because they'll open their mouth and they create that vacuum and it pulls all the water in and is what pulls the food in with it. And so these have the same kind of hunting strategy. And so some things that you guys can keep in mind for like what you can do to help preserve the shark populations. Avoid products that have shark ingredients in them. So makeups is something that very often has shark-based ingredients in it. So you have to read through it, because like if you have anything that says squalene, that is shark liver oil. Or things that are like cartilage pills, those often will contain shark cartilage because it's so abundant, because sharks are cartilaginous fish. That's what their entire body, their skeleton is made of. And so oftentimes they'll be selling shark cartilage as like, ooh, this will make your skin look really nice, because cartilage can help skin and make it look shinier and nicer. But if it's coming from sharks, that's very unsustainable. And so you should also avoid things like shark meat, shark fins, shark oils. Shark leather is another thing that's used often. and other things like that. Also reducing their consumption of seafood, because like I said earlier, a threat that sharks are facing is loss of food source. And so because by overfishing the oceans, we're causing problems for them, and that's because of our love for seafood, because it tastes really good, but it's harmful to the ocean to eat as much of it as we do. I'm not saying like everybody eats like a ton of seafood, but on average, the amount of seafood people eat is causing problems because of if you just took the average from everybody. And so you can also reduce, reuse, recycle. I'm sure you've heard that for like every single conservation thing you've ever seen, but it really does help because it decreases pollution and it makes it so more things get reused, because like plastics and stuff are really bad for the environment. They're also bad for sharks because they've been found to eat, they've opened the stomachs of sharks or pumped them, and they find trash bags, plastic, all kinds of random things, bottles. They even found license plates in shark stomachs. Yeah, all the trash that goes into the ocean, it eventually makes its way back to us one way or another. And so if we were to stop putting as much into the oceans, we would get less back to us. And so it's healthier for us in the long run. You can also donate or volunteer to shark conservation efforts to speak out against shark fishing and finning, because they are good at what they're doing, some of them. Like there's one that I'm a part of that's called Shark Stewards. And so they have meetings like monthly, and I'm not able to work with them sadly because they're down in California, but it kind of keeps me in the knowledge of what's going on. And so that's something that could be helpful. You can also write support legislation that's protecting sharks and write to representatives to try and encourage them to do more, because a lot of people, they don't even know that we have sharks here. Like, we literally have 12 or so species of sharks, depending on who you ask, native to Washington. Most people don't know that. And so they might know that we have a six-gill. But even then, I've had people be like, we have those here? I didn't know we had those here. And so, by not knowing that they exist, why would you try to protect them? They're not here. It doesn't matter. We're not affecting it. We are, because we have them here. People just don't know it. And so another thing is to work to stop the stigma and caricaturization of sharks, because like with Jaws and stuff, they're portrayed as these horrible, evil, man-eating things. In reality, a lot of them are pretty cute. They're sweet. They're lovable. Like, if we look at one of my favorites is the brown-banded cat shark. And so it is this one here, up in the top right corner, the little one that's nose is facing up. So they're super cute. Like they're not gonna be out to get you. But while I say that they're important and we need to respect them and they're not out to get you, they are still a wild animal. You should not go up to them, you should not try and pet them, harass them, touch them, do anything like that. Because if it does feel threatened, it will fight back. And so that's how people get nipped and bitten, is by bothering them and pestering them, and they don't like it. I've seen videos of people swimming with great white sharks, and this guy, he kept diving, he was a free diver. He kept diving down, he would touch the great white and then come back up. He'd touch the great white and come back up, and every time he'd touch it, it would twitch, because it didn't like it, because he'd go down and literally like whack it, and then go back up to the surface, take it right, go back down. And so he did it 4 times. And on the 4th time, shark didn't bite him, but it turned around and bumped him with its snout. It didn't even open its mouth, but it was just basically going, stop it, stop touching me, I don't like this. And then it swam off. If it wanted to kill him, it could have easily killed him. It would be real easy for that to happen, but it didn't. And that's a very good example of why it shows they're not out to get you. And so that's very important, because Jaws did a lot of damage to sharks in the way people view them. And so by educating people on the fact that they're not mindless killing machines, we're able to conserve them and protect our oceans. Because healthy oceans means a healthy planet. Because everything is interconnected, and our oceans make up the majority of the Earth. That's why it's called the blue planet. It's not called the green planet or the brown planet. It's called the blue planet because it's covered in mostly water. And so that's it. And so if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them. Or any statements that you want to say.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I'm from Fiji, so that's in the South Pacific. So as a Fijian, sharks are my spirit animal, right? And so when I saw this on Facebook, I was like, I have to go learn about sharks here in the Northwest, right? So just thank you. Thank you for uplifting and amplifying that, to protect sharks. And that really warms my heart. So,
Of course, I'm glad that you liked it.
yes,
I'm
really good.
I'm actually trying to get a degree studying shark behavior and conservation, and so that's what I'm working towards right now.
Thank you for what you're doing. Where do you go to school?
So I'm starting at Western next month, and I'm getting their bachelor's in marine biology with a minor in the Salish Sea studies, because I want to work around here and work for the sharks here, because, like I said, people don't talk about them because they don't know about them. And so in tropical places like Hawaii, Southern California, Fiji, other places like that, go to Florida, everybody's like, oh, there's sharks here, let's protect them. And then the ones that are in the places where people don't think of there being sharks because it's not warm water, they're kind of left behind and they're not protected.
So does the aquarium here work with any of the divers around here that to test out or to check out the sharks and whatnot? Do you educate them to say, hey, don't be, running up to them and touching them like you do the furry cows in Yellowstone?
Yeah, so if we have people come in and ask about sharks, we'll often say that. I don't think that we have like a direct, we don't have anybody that's like out there and is like, don't touch the sharks, like don't do that. But if like they come in during the talks, or like if they're looking in the gallery on the discovery days on the weekends, and they ask something about sharks, they're like, oh, I didn't know that there were 6 gills out here, I saw the sign there, and we'll kind of explain to them, this is what they are, this is why they're here, this is what we suggest. You most likely won't see one unless you're diving. If you do see one when you're diving, be happy that you've seen one, sit and watch it, don't try and harass it, because A, it could nip you, or B, it'll just leave, and you kind of wasted that chance of getting to see it. And so that's kind of what we do.
Do we know much if there are predators that feed on any of the sharks?
So it really depends on the shark species, because if it's really, like young sharks, they'll get fed on by other sharks. The spiny dogfish will actually eat smaller spiny dogfish and other elasmobranchs. And so elasmobranchs are like skates, rays, chimeras, and sharks, and like cartilaginous. And so the spiny dogfish, they'll eat other sharks, the 7-gill will eat other sharks, and so it kind of just depends on like how big they are. If it's a really big shark, like the 6-gill, when they're fully grown, there isn't really anything that's going to eat them. But if it's the brown cat shark that only gets 2.2 feet long, that's a snack for some other ones.
The 6-gill, do they come in every year to lay eggs here, or is it a cycle of multiple years?
So I think I didn't read it this time, but a little while ago I read it, and it was a cycle. And they're also oviviparous, and so they give birth to young, I believe. And so they don't lay eggs. The eggs hatch inside, so like a great white, they give birth to live young because the eggs hatch inside of the uterus, and they live in there for a while, and then when they're born, they are free swimming and they're completely ready to live.
I have the question that you had about divers being educated. Here's another opportunity for you here to display stuff like that out there that we have monthly.
There you go.
It really is. Because divers come through here all the time. Come out here any day, any day. There's all the dive shops have classes out here. Divers Institute of Technology comes out here with their scuba. We're everywhere here. It's a great opportunity.
Anything else?
Thank you.